Hey friends! The Global Chatter is currently on hiatus as we're getting ready for our upcoming season. However, in the interim, we've got some great bonus content from some of our most recent episodes, like the one you're about to listen to now. Check them all out, as well as some of our earlier episodes so you can get caught up. And as always, you can stop by theblackexpat.com to see what we're up to. Thanks for listening. All right, Kevi. So here's a real interesting thing I was just thinking about as you were talking. Do you think that when someone looks at their Black identity, like, does it look different depending on where their Blackness comes from? So, for example, the perspective of someone that maybe is Black and was born in France and maybe they're first, second generation born in France versus maybe an individual who's Black and just came from sub-Saharan Africa or came from the islands or came from somewhere else. Do you see like even a difference in terms of how they see their Blackness, especially in France?
Yes, I think that there are lots of differences and nuances, and that's even the reason why it is sometimes difficult to talk about one Black community in France. There's the question of the space and the question of the time. You were talking about the different, like if you are first generation, second generation, it's not going to be the same. But there's also where do you get your Blackness from geographically? You have lots of people who, before thinking themselves as a Black person, they would see themselves as a Senegalese French person, which is not the same as a Cameroonian French person. Plus, you have the opposition or the division, Caribbean versus Africa, which carries a lot of ideas of oppositions, decades and even 100 years ago of misinformation between the two sides of the Atlantic Ocean. There's also the question of your legal status. How did you become French? Are you French because you are from a French territory like Martinique, who has been French for 400 years? Or are you French because your parents, right before the independence of this African country, decided to move to France? Or were you born in Mali and did you come here? Do you have the French citizenship or not? So there are lots of question marks that make it very difficult to talk about one Black community in France. To the point that even the idea of noir, of Black, is sometimes rejected by Black people themselves, who tell you Black is something, a word that Europeans used on captives in the New World when they were stripped of their culture and their identity. I am a proud member of this African tribe. I'm not a Black man. This is something I already heard before. I have also respect that point of view. It's not mine. I'm a Black person. I was racialized in a way. So being from a Caribbean island, it's difficult to reject the concept of race or racial categories or something like that. Yeah. On
I have that same.
I wanted to also add something else. Is if you consider, for instance, a Black Caribbean identity, we also have, and it's something that comes from colonialism. We have a lot of subcategories where you would call that colorism in America, but some light-skinned Black people from the Caribbean don't want to be called noir because that's not what they are. They don't want to be included in the same categories of sub-Saharan Africans, for instance. So it's very complex.
So, do you think that because I'm just fascinated by the way people think depending on when their families immigrated. Do you find in the work that you do like that division of who even sees themselves as Black French versus someone who's just come? Do you see that if there's tension between Black people who've been in France for a long time versus the Black people who just came? Do you see that any kind of tension between those two groups?
Yeah, yeah, and the tension is still to be related with the concept of le bled that I was talking about later. Because, for instance, if you grew up outside of France and then you move to France when you're a student or a young adult to study to work, you're going to say, okay, at least I know my origins, I know where I'm from. I'm not like these black people born in France who have no idea of their culture and they are just being, they
Mm.
don't have an identity. They have been whitewashed by I don't know, Western culture. Whereas I grew up in Senegal, I grew up in Martinique, I grew up in another place.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, I know more about my culture than these poor black people born here. So yeah, there is that. And on the other side, there might be some sort of I would say oh, I forgot the word, a very, let's say, patronizing tone,
Mm-hmm.
look at someone who's just
Mm-hmm.
recently arrived in France because they have an accent, because they have different manners, or, yeah, they're different, so they are not very adjusted to like a modern urban life. So that would be another type of stereotype about
Mm-hmm.
newcomers.
And then let's take this even the other way. Do you, in your work, do you see maybe Black Americans and Black Canadians maybe treated differently than maybe some other Black groups that might immigrate or visit or whatever?
So that's the big deal, and this is like someone like Josephine Baker, who was an American celebrity who spent 50 years in France, who is like a French icon. She was a black woman. She became the sort of first black icon, and she's really respected and mentioned a lot in black culture. There are a lot of black French people who say enough with Josephine Baker, enough with these African American celebrities that came to France, were welcome, and now are used as a way to say, look, France was really nice to James Baldwin and Josephine Baker, therefore France cannot be racist. It's America who's racist. And younger black French people say we can't take it anymore, to the point that African Americans have a special position when they come to France, because when they come, they would have the American prestige surrounding them,
Mm-hmm.
and so they are not being treated like someone from Ivory Coast or someone from Guadeloupe,
Mm-hmm.
obviously. So there is that. And actually, African American intellectuals were in Paris. Someone like James Baldwin was aware of that, to aware
Right.
of the fact that he was being treated differently than someone who was from a French colonial territory.
And I think it's so important that we be aware of privilege, right?
Of course.
Because I have this conversation all the time with Black people from different parts of the world, and I go, let's not pretend. If you've got a Western passport and you're Black, there's already a privilege.
Yeah,
If you have a North American passport, right,
yeah,
you may not be privileged all the time in the US, but let's not front. You aren't getting always the same treatment that the Black people in that country are getting. And so that's what I thought was interesting this summer, watching the protest in France, in Paris and in the big cities, was that, I was talking to folks and saying, this isn't even just about George Floyd, right?
no.
George Floyd was the spark, but look at the stories that are coming out of France, right?
It is about
Because
Adam Traore. It is
brutality and
about Ziad
discrimination.
Mbouna. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I had the same exact conversation and said, the French have Black French people have their own list of names. Brown French people have their own list of names, right?
yeah.
So as much as we talk about Trayvon Martin, there are stories out of France you haven't heard of, because but they're there. And so, yeah, I'm very encouraged. I know maybe I'm on the minority, but I'm encouraged. I like hearing the fact that there are French people, Black French folks who are like, let's elevate our own Black French people and their stories. And so let's take it, let's take it to another angle. Because you brought up, the relationship between the U.S. and Canada, sort of. So France being, of course, having Belgium next door, which also has at least partial French identity. Do you see the differences actually between kind of, and I know Black French is such this big term, but even like Black French versus a Black Belgian experience? Do you even see those differences?
I think I do. So 3 years ago, I have one of my best friends who live in Brussels for years now. So it's a city I like. I go to Brussels a couple of times every year. And maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I went to a tour of the Congolese colonial history of Brussels. And it was led by a Togolese young man named Calvin Suarez.
Oh wow!
And Calvin is not a tour guide anymore. He's a Belgian congressman, so that really humbles me. He's not a tour guide anymore. He's a politician now. But back then, he gave an excellent
politician
tour.
now.
He's a politician now. But before starting the tour, he said something that blew my mind. When he started the tour, as a sort of preface, he said, this is Belgium, this is not France. So Black people are not as visible in Belgium as they are in France. We don't have such an old and deep presence of Black people in Belgium as in France. And it blew my mind because most of the time when I started tour with African Americans, I say, okay, this is France. This is not America. We don't have an old presence of Black people in France. In America. Like, what is this? What is this? And so something to me that was similar is a difficulty to cope with the colonial past. Belgium is widely seen as a nice country of non-threatening, funny Belgian people. And they are. It's a very welcoming country. You go there, you always have a good time. But when you look at their colonial past, the story of Leopold II in Congo, it's
it's atrocious.
It's atrocious. Like, how could you? And so you have this sort of smiley and dark side of the country.
Right.
That reminds me a little bit of France at the same time. But also, I think Belgium is a little bit more humble than France. So they do not have this sort of political arrogant discourse telling you that Belgium is the best political experiment ever. And whoever challenges anything about it is an enemy of our political system. I don't think Belgium is that stubborn and dogmatic about their policy when it comes to ethnic statistics and diversity in religion, multiculturalism, speaking different languages. I think Belgians are a little bit more open, less arrogant than France was like, we're the best, and if you don't agree, we're the best. You're just being influenced by Anglo-Saxon propaganda. Yeah, because Anglo-Saxon is the word that we use in France to put all the Canadians, all the Americans, all the British, all the Australians in the same bag. It's the Anglo-Saxon countries. So if you say anything like that, it's Anglo-Saxon propaganda. Belgium is not like that. Belgium is not.
So what you're saying is France is the DJ Khaled, we the best. We the best.
Yeah. So this past election in America, people were talking about American exceptionalism. And anyway, in our political discussion here, there's French exceptionalism in politics. Like, we invented freedom and we're the country of human rights, and yeah.
I laugh as an American because it's only because our media is loud that the rest of you get to hear all of this. Because I think we would hear the French version, honestly, if most of us just spoke French. That's just because we don't speak French. But and so I mean, just for comparison's sake, I'm imagining that the the black population in Belgium is going to be smaller than it is in France, just because France is a bigger country. Does that sound about right?
Yes, I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah.
But in
And
proportion,
so
I don't know about proportions. I know that Brussels actually has a very important Afro population, Afro
yeah.
descent population. Yeah.
And I've been interested in this term for a while, and so I always ask Black folks who live in Europe about it. Do Black French folks see themselves? And I don't know, you can't necessarily speak for Belgium, but this concept of Afropean, is that even a term that's used? Is there an Afro French, Afro Français, Afro Belgique? Like, is there a Belgian? Is there a sense of wanting to claim some of that identity for some folks, if not everyone?
There's not, if you talk about France, there's not one word that make everybody happy. For quite a long time in media, in daily life, people would use the word black in French, not noir but black, and it's
You mean in
this part.
English? Oh,
No,
actual
when they would
black
speak
blacks?
French, they would say les blacks
Okay.
because
Okay,
using
really?
using the English word would make it, I don't know, less real. Let's call them les blacks, and then it's all good. These past
Okay.
years, there has been people, um, black people in France saying, no, we want to be called les noirs. And actually, on the NPR, there
Mm-hmm.
was an episode of a podcast. The episode is named "We Don't Say That," and it's a Black American guy who goes to France and he speaks French, and he realizes that French people don't want to say noir; they want to say black. And so he does a whole investigation on why French people cannot say noir. But it is changing nowadays. There are white people who dare to say the word noir, but not everybody is on board. And the word Afropean, it is real. I have met with a British guy named Johnny Pitts. He wrote a book named Afropean, and he's a British journalist. He does an amazing work. But
Yep.
I think it's a very smart word. But for now, it sounds a little bit academic. I don't see young Afropeans calling them that. I don't hear a young French rapper saying, "I am an Afropean." It's more like in debates, in maybe in some media or among scholars, but it's not mainstream yet. Is what I'm trying to say.
And so for those who want to denote the black part, what do they say? Do they still use le black, or are they really going towards the le noir? Like, what are you hearing in music?
In music, you would hear Renoir a lot, which is Renoir is, we have Verlan backwards slang, so it's noir backwards, so it's Renoir. You would hear that a lot. You would hear Negro, which is like nigger, but like in a more urban, less racist way.
Right.
And yeah, that's about it. That's what you would hear, Negro or Renoir in lyrics.
I think the part that's just amazing to me is that I never considered that y'all would even be using the English word, especially being so French. Like, I would never have thought I'm like, why can't you say it in French if you could say it in English?
Well,
but I would have never considered that.
When we are a country so obsessed with making people speaking French properly, I don't understand why white French people would not say noir and they would use the English word. But the idea behind it is actually so what I found is in the 1980s, in the 1990s, the first images of positive young black people were African Americans. So everybody who looked like them became les blacks. It's in the wake of Will Smith that we all became les blacks.
Can I say, I've been doing a bunch of interviews with black people around the world. Can I tell you, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air touched everybody apparently who was black around the planet. Because I was talking with folks about how I grew up when I was growing up in Yaoundé, and somebody else was growing up somewhere else in Africa. They were like, oh my God, Fresh Prince, though, that was the show. Everybody in the 90s, if you're a certain age, you just remember Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, whether you spoke English or not.
White Europeans wanted to become black kids. On the podcast, Le Chip, we had the man who does the voiceover of Will Smith in the 1990s. And so he has, if you're French and you hear the guy, he is Will Smith. So he was on the show, and it was such a blast. That was amazing.
Just out of curiosity, was he black or white or something else?
He's a black man from Guadeloupe.
Okay. I was just saying, it would have been really funny if it was an old white man that was doing his voice in French.
No, thank God he's a black man.
So I guess what we've mostly learned from the podcast here is that Fresh Prince unites black people around the world.
I think so. It is good for the blacks.
It's good for the blacks. All right. On that note, we're gonna hop out. Thank you again, Kevi. Let me stop recording now. The Global Chatter from the Black Expat is hosted by me, Amanda Bates. It is executive produced by Justin Williams. You can find all episodes of The Global Chatter on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your podcast.